This is Including You, the new series from Lead at Any Level. Including You features stories from chief diversity officers and other executives who are creating inclusive cultures in their organizations. Our goal is to show what's working in companies just like yours, to give you the tools you need to keep pushing for progress in your own workplace. We want to create belonging and opportunity for everyone, including you. And now here's your host, Amy C. Waninger.
Welcome back to Including You. I'm your host, Amy C. Waninger, the Inclusion Catalyst. My guest today is Josh Miller. They are the founder and CEO of Ideas xLab, which uses the art of storytelling and community collaboration to impact public health. Through its Unknown project, Ideas xLab is working to unearth and honor the names and stories of Black enslaved people in Kentucky and beyond. Ideas xLab is based in Louisville, Kentucky, with a national scope of work. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Amy. Happy to be here.
I am excited to talk to you. I am just absolutely intrigued about this idea of art and community engagement and visibility and how you're using that concept to shift the culture. Can you tell me a little bit more about why visibility is so important?
So in our work through Ideas xLab, which we've been doing for over a decade, my now husband, Theo, and I founded the nonprofit. And the team has just continued to evolve, but it's always been artist-led with Black, queer, women artists with different neurodiversities, different ways of engaging in the world. And part of what artists are so good at is helping people to imagine what's possible and how we can create the cultures and communities that we want to be part of. And so visibility in all of those different forms and showing how they can practice self-determination and have hope and drive the future of what they want to see in community is really important. And so over the past decade of our work, we've been able to collaborate with local governments and nonprofit organizations, businesses, community leaders, researchers, and really seeing how these community and artist-led initiatives can impact health and being, spur policy change, and cultivate hope and belonging. So all of that is grounded in valuing lived experience. And when people are able to step into spaces as themselves, as their uncovered selves, the power that can have and the change it can create.
It seems to me that your organization is fighting what I would term as active erasure of cultures and communities and individuals. Can you talk a little bit more about how visibility and shining a light on people who have otherwise been excluded, ignored, or erased is an act of rebellion in a lot of ways, an act of revolution?
Yeah, so one example of the way that we're doing that work is through Unknown Project, which Hannah Drake and I launched in 2020. And you gave the overview earlier of unearthing and honoring the names and stories of Black enslaved people. And we're really looking broadly at America and the global African diaspora. And in a place like Kentucky, which is where the project launched, I now live in Denver, Colorado, and I go back and forth for our work. And as we expand to other sites, we actively saw promotion of parts of the community's history, whether that's the Kentucky Derby or the bourbon economy, but not a preservation and a valuing of history like the history of enslavement. Not only understanding how it contributed to the systems that exist, but also recognizing all of the individuals who actively shaped where the community is, a lot of its culture, and the different ways that community members continue to come together and to work together. And so by creating public art installations that honor the lives of enslaved people, that call on the unearthing of this history, there are countless numbers of ledgers and documents that the descendants of enslavers still have. They have them in their homes, they have them on bookshelves. And so by inviting them to say, this is a project and a place where you can make those public. We're not coming to say that you in 2024 were enslaving people. What we are saying is you can help in the healing of a community by helping people like Hannah connect to her ancestors. So there was a New York Times story in 2021 that came out right before our public art installation On the Banks of Freedom was unveiled. And there was just a sentence in there, it covered largely Unknown Project, but a sentence where Hannah said, I don't know any of my ancestry beyond my grandmother. And I don't even know my grandmother's full name. And a genealogist read that and proactively went out and searched and did all of the work to track Hannah's ancestry all the way back to a plantation in South Carolina, which we were able to go visit last summer. And not retelling, but the telling of history in an accurate way and saying all of these lives deserve to be known and honored and part of how we talk about the fabric that is America and what built it creates that space for healing and for creating a different way of all of us to relate to each other and then to imagine how do we create the communities that we want.
Yeah, there's been, of course, throughout the history of this country, a lot of whitewashing and a lot of sweeping things under the rug that especially white people don't want to admit they did or that happened, right? And we hear this kind of reimagining of history, if you will, that is much less honest, much more one-sided. And certainly, I'm not sure the word I want to use, but the retelling of the history itself is a violent act because it erases and obfuscates and denies what happened, what was done, what people did to other people. As you do this work, and you mentioned traveling to the plantation where Hannah's ancestors were held captive, what was the impact of that for her? What is the impact of the art installation on the community? What kind of feedback are you hearing or seeing or receiving based on this work?
So the impact for Hannah and Hannah's daughter Brianna went with us last year to the Lorik plantations. It and the even crazier level of the story is that her great grandmother's name was Hannah, and that was never something that they knew. So just being able to stand, there was at one point where Hannah's standing on the front porch of the house, and you, Hannah, never would have been allowed to be here. But did you know that your great granddaughter would be standing in this place in the future? And so it was this really full circle moment of getting to understand where do I come from, but also a shift in how can I as a Black woman today move through this space. And I think one of the things that really informed the creation of Unknown Project was in 2016 we went to Senegal, West Africa. It was a group of 15 of us. Theo and I were the only two white people on the trip. And that was the first time we can in America talk about imagining a place where Black people can move through any space and not be in fear of their safety, in having people profile them, all of these different things that continuously weight you down and impact your experience in the world. And being there for 2 weeks, we got to see what the other side could look like if in America facing white supremacy and the trauma of racism and all of these things was something that we dealt with, the freedom that can come with that for Black people. And so that's been one that really informed why this work is so important. Why are we doing it here in the US, in Kentucky and beyond? And we've seen as people come to the public art installation, they often talk about how I never knew about this history, not for Kentucky or not necessarily for the US. I didn't know how much of it was actively hidden or erased or edited. And I hadn't thought about the relationship of the place I am in related to the region. So Louisville, Kentucky sits across the river from southern Indiana. Indiana was a free state, Kentucky was a slave state. If you could get across the river, that was the beginning of the road to freedom. You were not free by any means, but it was the beginning of the road to freedom. And when you concurrently can say, look, you can see the riverbank right there. That is where, if you could just get there, that's where the beginning of the road to freedom was. That helps to reorient people to think, oh, I walked across that walking bridge. I've stood over in that park. And it shifts all of the relationship, not only to the physical place, but also to the history of why is this part of our city the way it is? What contributed to that? And so that's been one of the biggest pieces of one, we've had people just show up and bring photocopies of ledgers from their families that had one person's had 50 names of enslaved people and birth dates. Other people have mailed them to us. They've sent us wills on Twitter and they're like, here's a will for my family where enslaved people were deeded from one generation to the next. Our family has told this really romanticized story about a relationship where the enslaver was it and the enslaved woman were in love. And I'm trying to we need to tell this story differently because that is not accurate. And so that's what part of the invitation has been, and people have stepped into that. And then physically standing in the space on the edge of the platform facing Indiana, there are 6 sets of footprints, and they were contributed by Black Louisvillians, and they're paired with the names of enslaved people, and one says unknown. And we invite people to you can take your shoes off if you want. You can stand in those footprints and just imagine if enslaved people were standing on the banks of the Ohio looking across, trying to get up the courage to make that escape, what would that feel like? So there's been a lot of different ways that's impacted people individually, but also thinking collectively.
As you were talking about that, in a way, I feel a little guilty. I didn't know that this art installation was in Louisville. I'm based in Indiana. I spend quite a bit of time in Louisville, and I had no idea it was there. And so this is something that I'm going to seek out because I think it's important. I think it's something that everybody should experience, especially those of us that are familiar with this area. Louisville has been in the national spotlight recently for racial injustice, for the murder of Breonna Taylor. She slept in her bed. There's a lot of continued violence, gentrification within Louisville and the surrounding areas. What impact do you think an art installation like this or a project like this can have on public policy?
I think what you're bringing up right now, looking at Kentucky specifically, in addition to what you just named, they are also seeking to pass different legislation about what can be taught in schools. What about enslavement can even be mentioned in classrooms? And what we've heard from students who have come to the site and been at the installation or have just heard different parts about the history in the project are asking, why did we not learn this in school? Why am I only hearing about it now for the first time? And projects like this not only put forward a truer accounting and more comprehensive accounting of history, but also remind people of the information they should always have access to. And this isn't about trying to shame anybody about their history, but it is a recognition that history will not always be comfortable. You cannot expect to find it be comfortable for you. But it is, Hannah often compares it to a cake. You have all of these ingredients, and those are the things that have made what history is. And once the cake is baked, you can't unbake it, but you can't decide what you do with the cake. And so that is really what we're putting forward in terms of thinking about at a policy level. It might be what can be taught. It may be what is the role of reparations and thinking about how do we collectively heal. I just read the book, which I highly recommend. It's called My Grandmother's Hands. It's by Resma Menakem, and the subtitle is Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. And so a lot of the work that we are doing through Unknown Project, whether it's we're facilitating a book club. Right now we're reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which is a tremendous book and gives so much context to the systems that have been put in place, how those have reinforced a separation of people and othering in terms of trying to keep and maintain power. And by facilitating and engaging people in those conversations, and then looking at what are the internal practices we can each take to think differently about what trauma has looked like and how we heal as a community, all of those things can then impact the policies that are put in place, the cultures that exist. Culture is something that is invented and evolves over and over, and we have the power to change what those cultures look like, whether that's metro government, whether that's the community at large, whether it's smaller facets of community we engage with. And so that is a big call of what we hope people can envision things differently as we do this work through Unknown Project.
It's fantastic. And I look forward to seeing more. I look forward to visiting this art installation the next time I'm in Louisville. I may even make a trip down there just for this purpose, because it's an easy drive from Indy. For those who are in Indy, it's 2 hours down the interstate, but I think it's important. As you think about the future for Ideas xLab, for the Unknown Project, what other work or what other projects do you see in your future?
As we expand Unknown Project, we are working to build community relationships in other states in other cities. Our vision is that there will be unknown project sites throughout the US that are connecting people to learn about this history and to engage with it differently. Those could be public art installations, that could be one where a few that we're working on are connected to cemeteries that are often unmarked, but are where many enslaved people are buried. And so, one is creating those sites. Two is thinking about what are the different ways that arts and experiences can help people to connect to and understand this history differently. So, we're launching in the fall of 2024. We'll be launching an extended reality app. So when you show up at On the Banks of Freedom, you can pull the app up and there will be a griot or storyteller that actually engages with you about the site. And we're thinking about what other elements can be overlaid, whether that's poetry, audio, otherwise. But as we look at the next few years, it's one, building those sites and collaborations, thinking about how we activate them through experiences, and continue to call on the descendants of enslavers and invite them to participate in this project, whether it is the sharing of information, whether it is thinking about how we practice healing and repair, and recognizing that each of us has a different role to play in this work. It may be a conversation with your family, it may be getting policy changed in your city or in your state. And so there's a lot of ways for people to plug in, and that's what we hope they will take away from this is we all have a role to play, but the roles can look different.
Josh, I want to thank you so much. I have included in the show notes at includingyoupodcast.com links to your LinkedIn page, to the Ideas xLab website, to the Unknown Project website. I will put in links to the books that you mentioned, as well as the On the Banks of Freedom art installation. Is there anywhere else people can find you, this work, or more information?
I think all of those are a great start. We do have a YouTube channel where it's Unknown Project, and people can see different videos. There's a recap of our trip to South Carolina. There's the unveiling of our On the Banks of Freedom installation. So it's a great snapshot into different facets of the project. And my next trip to Louisville will be at the end of March. So if we can align things and you want to come see the installation, then I can take you on a tour. But definitely recommend for people coming to Louisville, whether it's going to On the Banks of Freedom. The Fraser Art Museum is a partner of ours, a collaborator in Unknown Project, and they have a site-specific art installation on their grounds connected to the project that adds more layers to the history. And I think those are some really good ways to begin to get involved. And then for people who are in different communities, think about what Unknown Project could look like there. It's a responsive project. It's not a cookie cutter, we're coming into your community, but it's what does your community want? And how do you want to help participate in the telling of history and the healing that our nation needs to do?
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And I will make sure that the links, the YouTube link and the Fraser Art Museum link are also in the show notes so that people can find those as well. Josh, thank you. This has been so enlightening. It's just been interesting and insightful to speak with you today. And I'm sure my audience will appreciate you as well. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This has been a great day.
If you've enjoyed this episode, follow Lead at any level on LinkedIn and YouTube. Then join us for Including You video simulcast every Thursday at noon Eastern. Including You can also be enjoyed each week as part of the Living Corporate audio podcast series, available on all major podcast platforms. Learn more at living-corporate.com. Including You is brought to you in part by Lead at Any Level, a boutique training and consulting firm improving employee engagement and retention for companies that promote from within. Lead at Any Level. Leaders can be anywhere and should be everywhere. Learn more at leadatanylevel.com. Lead at Any Level and its logo are registered trademarks of Lead at Any Level LLC. The views and opinions of guests on our show do not necessarily reflect the positions of Lead at Any Level, Living Corporate, or the sponsors of Including You.
That's it for this week's edition of Including You. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to leave us a comment or a review to help others find us as well. Be sure to join me next week when my guest will be Wendy Koch of Engineered Leadership Solutions.